This morning, banish fear forever. I understand this is the time for New Year's resolutions, but I broke so many that I've stopped having any. And I think we've started in a bad way with this rain, but nevertheless, it's wonderful to see so many who want God and will come out in the rain. Master used to say, when it rains in Los Angeles, nobody comes to church. But it's wonderful to see that is changing. And a lot of it is due to his great work with many of us and the world in general. One of the younger members of the congregation gave me this little verse I'd like to read you about New Year's resolutions. It says, "I'll clean the corners of my heart and sweep out all the debris, because this time I wish the year a bright and happy me." So that's a new angle we can think of. It's quite cute. So uprooting fear forever, that surely is one of the resolutions we should make. Perhaps the greatest is to do away with fear, which interferes so much with not only our physical bodies, but our mental and spiritual natures. Banish fear forever. First, we must know, what is fear? What is fear? Well, the definition is, it's an emotional state of consciousness varying from simple restlessness or unrest, lack of ease, due to worries, real or imagined. That's the simple form. Then it goes further than that. It can become a deep state of emotion, characterized by paralysis and even death, because of this strong emotional thing we call fear. It affects not only the physical, it affects the mental, it affects the spiritual part of us. So we must know how to be rid of this thing called fear. Fear affects, as I have said, it would be bad enough if it just affected our bodies, but it permeates our mind. And worst of all, it takes away the joy of God within us as our own soul consciousness. It increases the ignorance within us, which is the worst sin. So we must understand this fear. Our Master has given us a wonderful statement about the havoc played by this thing called fear. So let us read from that first. From his teachings, he has this to say: a mental indulgence in fear will create a subconscious fear habit. We'll say more about this subconscious fear habit later. Thus, when something really upsetting in the regular routine occurs, the cultivated subconscious fear habit will assert itself, magnifying the object of our fears and paralyzing the will to fight fear faculty. We cannot stand up against it sometimes. So strong is this fear. This faculty is in the conscious mind. So it is very important to understand about fear. Now, fear is something which is very insidious, because of this one statement of our Master that it lurks in the subconscious mind, and that feeds up into our conscious mind, and it spoils all our faculties, good faculties of the soul, so that we cannot operate as we should as children of God. I remember distinctly that there was a gentleman came to my office one time, and he was busy practically the 24 hours of the day with a taxi cab business, so that he had no rest. And he was jittery, he was filled with fear. And I tried my best to overcome his pathology, but nothing would work. One day he came in the office all smiles. He says, you know, I sold my taxi cab business. And he was a changed man. That fear of things that were coming showed in his face, and it was only a short time before his healing took place. So this fear has a terrific effect on us. We must realize that. We must understand that it can be overcome, and the best way, as we will point out shortly, is through realizing that you are not apart from God. That's the main point to remember. If you are not separated from God, there's no fear. Fear is not in God's consciousness. Fear is in this duality of consciousness, this worldly consciousness. It cannot exist in God's consciousness. And so if we will but realize that and remove that idea that we are separated from God, fear is nothing. It cannot permeate the subconscious mind, and therefore it cannot be fed to our conscious mind, wherein it can raise havoc, as the Master pointed out. This, we must remember, is one of the main things of our talk this morning. Now, a little story comes to my mind, which I think is good on this rainy day. This Sunday school teacher, imagine a Sunday school teacher, had a little boy there, and he said, evidently he found out he was doing something he shouldn't. And he says to him, he said, you know what happens to little boys who smoke? Sure, he says. She just said, what? Where? Where do they go? Up the alley. So the little boy knew all about Hades and so on. So that teacher was trying to instill in the little boy what? Fear. Fear, that's all. But evidently the little boy had overcome fear to quite an extent. Now there are several kinds of fears, and they all have an important bearing upon our living and upon our relationship with one another, and especially upon our relationship with God. Physical fear. Physical fears are what? They are the fear especially of pain, and the fact that we may become incapacitated to carry on our work, do the things which we should do. Those are the main things, or the physical aspects which we fear about fear. Is the pain. Pain must be eradicated not only temporarily, but permanently. Now, what are the mental aspects or kinds of pain? Well, they are the different faculties, such as we may fear we are not going to be a success. That is, we may have unfulfilled desire. We fear we're not going to be successful, not to carry on our business, not to take care of our family and many things. We fear mentally losses that may come upon us. And the worst perhaps is, through these hidden fears we have an inferiority complex, which is unbecoming to a child of God. But the worst kind of fear is that spiritual fear. Spiritual fear wherein we fear death. Why? Because we do not understand death, that's all. If we perform the techniques of self-realization fellowship given by our Master faithfully, with faith in the infinite Father, death will not touch us because we'll know what death is. We will understand conscious sleep, which is what death is. And these fears can be eradicated. And perhaps the worst spiritual fear is the fear that we will be cast into oblivion. Those who do not know the presence of the soul within, who never take the time to know it, do not follow the Master's work, naturally, when death approaches, they do not know where they're going. They do not know what is coming. Naturally, they think they're going to be cast into oblivion. That's natural. But by following the Master, his different techniques, they can know even death. Knowing death, knowing anything, you do not fear it. You fear a thing because you do not understand it. But when you follow the techniques of self-realization fellowship left by our beloved Guru, you know what death is, because you can be conscious through the state or the breathless state. You will not die from doing the techniques. You will live, and you will not fear death. So these are the main fears we must overcome: physical, mental, and spiritual. And the worst is, or are those spiritual fears. Fear of death, fear of being cast into oblivion. We, children of God, why should we fear that? Our birthright is to know our Father, be one with Him, and when we realize there is no separation between us, there is no fear. There cannot be fear in the unity of God's presence. You know yourself, you who meditate, and there are many in this room who meditate regularly. In the unity of God's presence, is there any duality? Is there any fear? It cannot be. Fear is in outward consciousness where there's duality. So that's the cause of fear, is that we do not live where we belong, in conscious contact with the one infinite Father. One great 14th century saint said, and he meant whenever there's separation from God, there's death eternal. He said, when you feel and know the love of God, there is life without end. Without that love of the infinite Father, there is death without end. So there's the answer to fear. One of the greatest things is we must know the presence of God within. Knowing that, we can live even in this world of duality, feeling one with Him as we perform our action. That's the greatest gift I think the Master has brought to us here in America, is the ability, by following the science of yoga, to know the presence of God, be one with Him, never feel apart from Him. That's the greatest thing. And that's the greatest medicine, so to speak, for fear. To abolish it not only temporarily, but permanently. Not just in good times, but eternally. That's the greatest medicine to uproot fear forever. Patanjali says, destroy the cause of pain, tear it out by the roots. There's only one way to tear it out, and that's to know and realize only one consciousness exists. That's the eternal Father. And we can do it because we're made in His image. And so, going on just a little bit, perhaps the greatest effect of fear is the effect on our minds and consciousness. You know when fear comes, what happens to your mind? Well, peace goes away. We lose that peace. And by losing that peace, we cannot feel the bliss and peace of the soul, which is the presence of God within us. That's what happens when fear invades us. And worst of all is the mind is in a turmoil, and that robs us of our soul qualities, efficiency. We lose our efficiency the minute fear comes within us. We cannot think plainly. We cannot act in our business as we should. And the worst thing is we lose contact with the soul or the presence of God. Fear has a terrific effect upon our mind and consciousness. Also, fear throws a veil around our intuition. You know, we cannot know God through the senses, mind, and intellect, or through the reason. We know God through the intuition of the soul. What does fear do? It throws a veil right around. And we cannot even conceive God at that time. We're in the midst of fear. We can only conceive one thing, and that is the emotion of fear itself. So we must overcome somehow and eradicate forever this emotion of fear. As I have said, the best way is to know the presence of God within. Know Him. Make the effort. And fear will not trouble you. Because God is love, and we are love, and we are one with Him. When we lose the intuition of the soul, That is, when we cannot feel the presence of God within us, what happens? We lose confidence. We lose confidence in our abilities. And not having that confidence, we cannot act as we should in any line of endeavor. The confidence, you look, introspect yourself when you've been fearful. Where's your confidence? You haven't any. It's gone away. That's the thing we must understand. The presence of God gives us confidence. The presence of His great consciousness within us in a dynamic way gives us confidence to stand against anything, no matter what it is. Why? Because that's what we are at that time. We're not fear at that time. We're the great omniscience of God's consciousness. We have to make that dynamic to our everyday living. Then nobody can touch us. Fear cannot enter. And we will have banished fear forever. And so, to uproot fear permanently, we must understand and banish the cause. Now, the cause of fear, as I have said, is in outward consciousness. Living in outward consciousness too much. That's where fear operates, in the duality of consciousness, not in the inner presence of God within. So that's what we must eradicate, the cause of fear, and we must remove it permanently. In other words, we must, by following the techniques of self-realization fellowship, be able at will, not occasionally, but at will, to feel the presence of God, to rise above duality, to know this is the cosmic dream. We must at will be able to step from this dual consciousness or mind, whatever you want to call it. We must be able to step into the unity of God's presence right within us. We can do it. We can do it by the practice of yoga, as given to us through the teachings of self-realization fellowship. We can at will, think of it, stop this active mind. As Master says, gone forever are the fitful flickerings of mortal memory. Gone forever. You can do it if you practice yoga. You can at will leave the world behind, leave the mind behind, leave fear behind, and in the presence of God you stand. United, as Master says. Spotless is my mental sky. Eternity and I, one united ray. The little bubble of ego has become the sea of bliss itself. Master used to give the illustration of the wave in the ocean quite often. You see the waves rolling up, their movement, their trouble, their duality. And we see underneath that, in our imagination, the great ocean, quiet, still. The trouble, the fear is in the wave. There's no fear in the ocean. And Master used to say, the wave must return to the ocean. The wave must return to the ocean. And so we, being waves of His great omnipresence, must return to His ocean of bliss. It must come. Didn't the wave come out of the ocean? Didn't we come out of His light and love? We must return to that. You cannot escape. But the wonderful thing is, if we make a little effort on returning, the reward is freedom from fear forever. There is no fear in God's consciousness. It cannot exist. I remember when I used to see the Master, and some of you who knew him, I know will corroborate this for me. When I entered into His presence or sat with Him, there was no fear. Fear had gone. Why? Because the Master was the voice of the infinite. None other than God's omnipresence come here to help you and to help me return home. And in His presence, all my troubles vanished. I'd have a long list of them, sometimes longer than others, depending on how things were going. But in His presence, they vanished. God is not partial. We're all His children. Can you imagine Him being partial to one as against another? So I found His presence in the Master that way. Fear cannot exist in God's consciousness. I have another reference which the Master wrote, in which I love to read because he states it so clearly and so beautifully from the science of religion. The Bible says, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you?" That should be our business, to know that. All of us as individuals are so many reflected spiritual selves of the universal blessed Spirit, God. Just as there appear many images of the one Son when reflected in a number of vessels full of water, so is mankind apparently divided into many souls occupying these bodily and mental vehicles, and thus outwardly separated from the one universal Spirit. In reality, God and man are one, and the separation is only apparent. But what a delusion. You all seem there and I seem here. But we close our eyes and we meditate and we lift our consciousness to the spiritual eye and we see the light of Christ. There is one. That's where we belong. If we can do that at will, that's all, at will, fear cannot exist. It can never come again. Master said, we were talking about such things, and I said, well, isn't it wonderful we get out of this delusion, and then when the cycle comes round again, back we are in the mess. He says, no. Once out, always out. Think of it. Once out of this thing, always out. Eternally. That's why we sing the chant, "From this sleep, Lord, will you wake me? From this dream, Lord, will you wake me? To live forever in thee." If we have a utopia here, we'll not be satisfied after a while. But with God, there is all fulfillment, unending. Such is His presence with us, and such is our birthright we must attain. And so, separation from God is only apparent. It is not real. Now you must prove that, and you can prove it by following self-realization teaching. That's why the Master is such a master. He didn't bring us ideas. He brought us the techniques whereby we can supersede the ideas and through realization know that there is no separation between us. And our Father is always with us. We have to make that our own. We have to make it dynamic to our consciousness. And so, in conclusion, to permanently live without fear, the greatest point is to banish the idea we're separated from God. To remove that separation. You stop and think, just with an idea, and if you could feel there's no separation between you and your Father, would you fear anything? Would I fear anything? No. We have to make that a reality, that's all. We have to make that a reality. We have to realize these things. Not in idea. That helps us, but until you feel and know your oneness with God, it is not so. That is what we must do. We must merge in the presence of God. Merge in His presence so that we are and know we are one with Him. I hate to say we are Him, but that's true. There's only one consciousness, and that's God's consciousness. There's only one love, and that's God's love. And yet when we see it in others, in our families and those near and dear to us, it seems apart. There's only one love, for God is love, and there's only one consciousness, and that's God. It is separating into many. That's the delusion that we stay in. But by the grace of God, and the fact that He has sent to us our Master, we can know there is no separation between us. We can, through the performance of those techniques and meditations which the Master has left with us. It is open to everybody, but we remember the words of the Bible, "Many are called, but few are chosen. None come unto me, except I draw them," says the Father. And we should be fortunate that here we are drawn to God. We're drawn. We came here because God lifted us up there. And we must know and be one with Him. And so, God is love. God is love. That's the greatest thing. And I'll close with one more reference from our own Bible. God is love. And he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. There is no fear in love. That's the answer that you have been looking for. There is no fear in love. Turn your attention within and feel the presence of God. There's no fear there. But perfect love casteth out all. Master says it this way. Do your meditations, practice prayer, and love God. Why? Because he knew the truth. God alone is, and God is love. Fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. God is love. And if we merge in his presence within us, there'll be no pain that can touch us. When you can at will rise above this outward consciousness and feel your oneness with God, pain cannot follow you. Then if you merge in his presence, then you can say, as the Master said, I stand unshaken through the crash of breaking worlds. Think of it. Lord Shankara said in a little different way. Same thing exactly. I am he. I am he. Blessed Spirit. I am he.